Okay, we have an hour before lunch for a discussion and many fascinating things to cover. Let me quickly introduce the panelists first. We have Matt Dempsey from the Irish Farmers Journal, Mary Graham of Practical Small Projects, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to spend a couple of minutes introducing the details of what they do, how it's relevant, and how it intersects with the issues that concern us today. Philip Walton of Better Environment for Nuclear Energy, and Allan Navratil, an environmentalist, horticulturist, and farmer interested in biofuels. So if I could start at this end.
I edit the Farmers Journal, which is the only paid-for farming publication in the Republic of Ireland, and we also have a large slice of the Northern Ireland market. It's a trust, so the profits go back into the sector. Our directors give their time free of charge, and we don't pay any dividends, which gives us a lot of freedom to do the things which we think are important for the rural and agri sector. Recently, we bought the Irish Field. For those of you that follow the thoroughbred horse breeding and racing industry, Ireland, after the United States and Australia, produces more thoroughbred foals than anywhere else in the world. So we see ourselves as the only genuine rural sector publishing company in the country, and I'm also the chief executive of the company, so it gives an interesting range of people to meet and hopefully things to do.
I just want to say a few words about what we've been doing for the past few years. Solar energy serves as a tantalizing prospect to act as a catalyst to provide new health, educational, and income-generating opportunities in Africa. And 2 years ago, I started a local business called Africa Power in Mali, West Africa, with the idea of providing a more affordable source of decentralized energy while mitigating rapid urbanization problems. The implementation of solar lighting electric projects executed by local businesses such as Africa Power makes the technology indigenous, as it's the first company in Mali to manually assemble photovoltaic panels and install them in health maternities and schools throughout the country. And what makes the model so successful is producing high results in a short amount of time, is that our group, for example, will enter a village, and if it installs a system in a maternity, once it's lit up, that is often the first light that many villagers have seen, and villagers gather around, and conversation about solar energy systems happens naturally. And villagers discuss ways in which they may generate income using these panels, and thus a real natural formation of micro-enterprises occurs. Another example of the success of the model was, for example, when we installed lighting in a school. Previously to the installation, 6 out of 37 students had passed the national exam, and 1 year later we found that 36 out of 37 students had passed the national exam with the lighting. And I really believe that that has to do with the Malians having this sense of ownership over the technology and knowledge on how to use it. And I really believe that companies should consider supporting organizations that share a similar philosophy and look to creating a climate for future investment, which means supporting initiatives where countries develop themselves. And like Monsieur Bakui said yesterday, solar may not be the practical solution for large cities with infrastructure already in place, but it certainly makes sense in Mali where the grid does not extend past the capital. And it is not so much the solar technology itself that brings prosperity and success, but it's the implementation method. An implementation method far exceeds the importance of a company's product when working in Africa. And building an alliance with locals by supporting development of local business is key. And American and European companies may find that they later have a fighting chance to compete with Chinese companies if they support local business today. And the last thing I want to say is, if any company, large or small, is planning on installing panels in a developing country, I strongly suggest that they consider the implementation method. And this will far exceed the importance of the technology itself. Cultural factors are of key importance and will most likely determine whether the projects fail or succeed.
And we should keep up that picture from this inspirational story throughout our discussion. Philip.
Okay, my name's Philip Walton. Up till 2 years ago, I was Professor of Applied Physics at NUI Galway. I was there for 27 years and I'm now retired. I am a member of a group in Ireland called BENE, standing for Better Environment with Nuclear Energy. This we formed, a group of us formed about 2 years ago to be a lobby group to help stimulate a reasoned, balanced debate on the subject. Now, we don't believe that just there's a panacea to our problems, but we feel that nuclear is one option that we should consider. We all know the reasons at this conference in particular. Of course, we've got peak oil and we've global warming. So my attitude is that, and it's repeated by Lord Oxburgh this morning, that things are going to get so serious that we're going to need everything we can lay our hands on. In Ireland, the situation is fairly grim. For example, if you look at our electricity generation, it's over 90%. I think it's about 92% is from imported fossil fuels. And 70% is from gas. And that gas is going to more and more have to come all the way from Russia via pipeline. So we are extremely dependent on imported fossil fuels. There is an ambition of the government that by the year 2020 we will have 33% of our electricity generated by renewables. Now, I'm all in favour of renewables. I'm all in favour of strict conservation measures. As I say, we're going to need everything. But I think we still have, I hope they can achieve 33%. But as I say, I hope that's true. But we've got to be a bit realistic about the use of the renewables. We've heard, for example, that in many cases biofuels use nearly as much energy to produce them as there is in the fuel in the end. And it won't make up a very significant amount of our deficit. Also, wind energy, and I'm in favour of that. And Ireland has a great climate for that. But A, it's intermittent, and B, even with our climate here, on average, they are only producing about 25% of what they're rated at. So we hope to have a reasoned, rational debate about the possibility of Ireland going nuclear. Most of you will know that we are not nuclear. There was a proposal back in the 1970s to build a nuclear plant. That did not go ahead. But I suggest that things are very, very different today. There's a different scene out there, as I mentioned, and so we should consider it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. There's a great advantage in coming last, because most of what I wanted to say has already been said. I would like to mention there are many figures as to what the net result is from biofuels and how much fossil energy goes into producing a unit of biofuels. I was shocked the other day to see an American figure of the equivalent of 1 gallon of gasoline to produce 1.1 gallon of gasoline, which actually went into your tank. So we need to do comparisons. The equation of I equals PAT may be familiar to some of you. Basically, it's impact equals population times affluence times technology. It's a no-brainer, and perhaps we should remind ourselves of others. Anyone who is short of cash has to save or go bust. There may be some uncertainty as to when peak oil will happen, but there is no uncertainty that it is a finite resource, so it is only common sense to save it if for no other reason than it takes time to put substitutes in place, and substitutes are unlikely to keep pace with oil decline. And lastly on that one, if you have your resource depletion you double its duration. And we could do that without seriously affecting our lifestyle. If the so-called third world were to catch up on the first world, as they aim to do, it would take several planet Earths to provide the resources. I just want to finish on that one. And the last speaker referred to the sustainable and his overhead, to his sustainable level of population as being 500 million. We are now 13 times that level. I've been asked to conclude, so I will conclude. I would like to refer to Professor Pang particularly and emphasize what he said. We must alter our lifestyles. We must develop better and more efficient public transport, reduce consumption, and develop alternatives. I rest my case.
Thank you. So, over to you for your thoughts and questions to this august panel. You know, it's incredibly difficult to see. I think I see Richard Hardman.
I've got a question for Michael Dittmar and also for Philip Walton. Difficult, impossible, and which is which, and it really depends on our attitude. If we see things as undesirable, we're likely to put a lot into that impossible category. And I'm really referring to nuclear energy. It's rather interesting. The chief scientist of Schlumberger at the Geological Society last week pointed out that if you ask the public which was more dangerous, surgery on themselves or nuclear energy, they plumped for nuclear energy. Whereas asking scientists the question, they came up with the reverse, that nuclear energy was a lot less dangerous than being operated on. So I would just really like to ask Michael Dittmar whether his views are really conditioned by the fact that at the present time, nuclear energy as a concept is very unpopular in the world.
Well, I mean, personally, as you might have noticed, I have not even mentioned if it's dangerous or not dangerous. And I think this is partially an issue which needs to be discussed at some point in a rational way. But for the real discussion, can nuclear energy be increased and by how much? It has nothing to do with this question. I mean, we know coal is very dangerous. Probably is more dangerous than current nuclear. But I mean, this, I think, is not the real question.
Yeah, you asked about the safety of nuclear power and about it being unpopular. There's certainly no doubt that it is unpopular with a great many people. But in my opinion, that unpopularity is not really rational when you look at the facts. The actual safety record of the nuclear industry is tremendous. I mean, there are about 12,500 reactor years. There are about 440 nuclear reactors working in the world. And in the Western world, we've had one accident, the 3 Mile Island accident, where nobody was injured. Okay, it was a financial disaster to lose a plant like that. But then, of course, we have the Chernobyl accident. The Chernobyl accident was in a badly designed Russian reactor, an unauthorized experiment taking place, and there being no containment. All Western reactors have a containment vessel. But even if you look at the Chernobyl accident, the actual consequences of that accident have been analyzed carefully by the World Health Organization in the Chernobyl Forum. And the actual consequences are way less than the average person in the street believes. For example, there's about 50, the total deaths is about 50. And then there's a possible increase in cancers in the immediate surroundings of maybe 4,000 deaths. That would increase the cancer rate in those surrounding areas from about 20% of the population to maybe 23%, which we would never be able to tell whether it really existed. Now, it was a very serious accident, not belittling that, but the actual consequences. When you think coal mining in China, there's about 5,000 coal miners killed a year in getting the coal out.
A quick response from Michael and then Nate.
Actually, I would like to just to respond to this. I mean, first of all, Chernobyl and this World Health Organization report on it, in fact, is a real scandal. I mean, I just recommend everybody to look at this document, and when you look at it and look at the pictures which are there, you see kind of a document out of the best time of the Cold Wars made by Soviet, how it was called, KGB. It looks absolutely identical, but I just can recommend to look at it, and if you base sort of your arguments about positive and negative health effects on this report, then, I mean, you belong sort of to the Cold War type people, but from the eastern side. I'm sorry.
I'm very concerned about declining net energy, because if oil and natural gas decline, especially not the gross numbers but the net numbers, that means unless we offset that by efficiency and conservation or demand destruction, economic growth will stop. So we have to replace that with something. But if we replace it with something, what if we do develop nuclear fusion? What if we come up with an energy source that has a 30 or 50 to 1 energy return? Then that means that all the other non-energy inputs are scaled by increased population and scaled by increased entropy in other areas. Soil, water, land, everything else all scales up when it accompanies energy. If you get a 30 to 1 energy gain that ripples through the system, it's like depositing money in a fractional banking system. Half of it gets split between the entrepreneur and the other half gets split among the consumer, and then they just don't worry and they waste and they spend more, and as you saw in my presentation, it doesn't make them happier. So I agree with Lord Ron Oxburgh that we need to plug the gaps so that we don't sink the ship, but a lot more energy for the next 200 years is not necessarily the answer and not the way to think about it.
If I could ask a question under Chairman's prerogative on that line. I mean, what does the new brain science tell us about the way people think about nuclear? I'm thinking in particular of the opinion polls, which quite clearly show there is a renaissance. I mean, it's coming back as a viable option in the minds of many people, and yet it's not a short-term thing. By the admission of Areva, the company that's supposedly going to build the new generation of reactors in the UK, they can't deliver a nuclear electron until 2017 at the earliest. Of course, that has a lot to do with public inquiries and so forth, but we're not about to suspend the due process of democracy. So why are people attracted to this argument?
It's a discount rate thing. They didn't think there was a problem, and now they're recognizing that there aren't a lot of options, and so it's the large long-term negative is becoming closer, so it has more value. Same thing as wind turbines. Not in my backyard, but as soon as we know that we recognize that we need them, they're beautiful, and let's have them. So I think people know that we need them, and that's why the sentiment changed. As far as the neuroscience, I have no idea.
Okay, I saw someone in the gloom there in the front row, and I think he's going to stay with the nuclear issue, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Pierre Bocchis. To stay with the nuclear is always a difficult thing, because coming back to Nate, you have here both brain, the emotional one and the rational one, which collide. Just the very short exchange of views on Chernobyl shows it. You had a lot of applause to Michael's reaction to Philip's statement. I think scientifically Philip's statement is very close to reality. I attended an Academy of Medicine seminar, a full day on Chernobyl. They are rather close to what you say. They are not bribed, those people, they are academicians. The head of European cancerology was there, and he did agree. But because it's so emotional, you had a lot of applause by people who haven't read any of those documents. We just have looked at Arte, showing all the disformation of children and so on, which you have exactly in the normal percentage. So I'll leave that here. I would like to come back to the rational subject, which Michael, in fact, restricted his presentation. But to do that, I would need the conclusion of Michael, so I can ask questions on each of the points. Can we do that? Go back to his last slide. I think it's very essential. It's very essential to have a rational discussion. And I asked the chairman of ASPO. He said, "You ask and you see what happens."
No, as chairman, I'm not allowing that. We need to move
You're not
quickly.
allowed. Okay, then I'll make comment question. First one on the question of resources for the mining, you just look any site and you see that there's a very high elasticity of reserve to price. They're exactly the opposite to oil. You take the site of the US General, USGS, and you look state by state in the US, it's an official site, the reserve of uranium with price. And you see the extreme elasticity. Yeah? Second, there was no exploration for 20 years because the price was too low. So what you said about the reserve issue completely forget the reality of the industry.
Okay.
No figure you mentioned. So my question is, how can you come to a conclusion that we are going to be short, and especially short in the medium term, in the coming years? You forget completely to speak about stocks, which are important. You completely forget to speak about enrichment, where you can change the amount of fuel from the same quantity of raw uranium. How can you say that the price has been multiplied by a factor of 10 times? That the spot market, which represents 5% of the transaction. 95%, it tripled or doubled, no more than that. Okay. So all your statements are based on totally non-reality related. Sorry for that. So ask the question about the price and the reserves. Only these two. But I could have on all your presentation the same type of remarks.
Yeah, please.
I mean, actually, perhaps you should look at some documents, especially from the mining industry. I did, and this is exactly what comes out of these presentations and so on. You can shake your head, but look at the diagrams which was showing is from the mining industry itself, and they know very well, actually the EIA, they put out this warning in '98, when it came out that there's less uranium than is required coming out of the mines every year, and we have to do something, and nothing is being done. Now, the figure from last year is lower than 2005. It is not because of this and that. The Cigar Lake mine is down for a couple of years. This is the only project which exists. There are no new mines planned, and I mean the numbers are very obvious. Now, I was saying about the stockpiles. Sorry, now I can finish. Now the stockpiles, I was mentioning the stockpiles. Yes, there are stockpiles. Military reserves. A divine intervention, which perhaps you would like, I would like let's start ending the nuclear arms of France. This will make survival of French nuclear power plants for a long time. Very good. I would immediately sign your proposal to the French government. Thank you.
Okay. Nuclear energy, we've had a good discussion on nuclear energy. It provides a tiny fraction of global energy. So no more nuclear questions, please. We will talk about everything else from the rest of the discussion. I see a gentleman in a pale thing there. Non-nuclear, I hope.
Hello? Hello? Yep. That sounded less like an argument, more like contradiction to me. But anyway, I've been working, looking at risk mitigation in businesses. I've been working with Rob Hopkins, for example, in transition towns. And I would urge people like Jeremy to have a look at what the transition towns are doing, which is very interesting. My question is that today I saw that the sea lamprey had returned to the River Tamar in the UK. The sea lamprey is an ecological indicator species that shows the growing health in British rivers. What I would like to ask the panel is, what do they think are the supply chains that are the economic indicators of the lack of health due to the coming peak oil crises? I'd like to see their consideration on that, please.
I wonder if I can bring Matt and Mary in on that one.
The climatic indicators of... let me go back slightly. What has happened this year? 2 years ago, the OECD published a unanimous report saying that wheat prices, and as Disraeli, I think, rightly said, if a man doesn't understand the wheat trade, he doesn't understand life. But we got the OECD to forecast wheat prices out for 10 years, and broadly they were forecast at 100 to 110 euro a tonne. They may be arguing about something more interesting, but anyway, let's pass on. So, We had forecasted the OECD for €110 a tonne out for the next 10 years. Now wheat prices have doubled in the space of 1 year. This is an absolutely pivotal, fundamental change in the supply-food balance affecting the world supply chain. What do we see in the UK? I think we've seen the same in Ireland. There's a number of factors at work. I don't think any of them are particularly applicable to a peak oil scenario as such. What it does mark, I think, is a growing awareness coupled with a degree of complacency that Europe can import whatever it needs at whatever the world costs happen to be and does not have to be engaged in dirty or messy industries of its own. So what do we see in this country? We see, for instance, pig farms being slowly licensed out of existence because A, they tend to be smelly, and B, if not properly handled, their manure gets into the river and your indicator species, in fact, may not survive. And we see a range of industries being exported to the third world and being removed from European consciousness as we cope with a static, slightly declining population versus the graphs we've seen from many of the speakers here giving the world population on a world scale. And I think those of us who live in Europe are growing to be utterly insulated from the realities that are affecting the rest of the world. And what has happened to the price of food is simply one example of what is happening to the price of energy and an ignoring of what many new technologies can contribute to energy sufficiency. What we're seeing, of course, from a farming perspective, and cheap energy has reduced farming to penury in many parts of the world, including those not in receipt of European payments. What we are seeing now in the case of farming is a perception by farmers that at last energy is being costed on the base of roughly production in the broadest sense rather than on the cost of extraction. And this, for me, is the fundamental difference that we're seeing over the last few years, and why I think a conference like this, focusing on peak oil and I don't think sufficiently its broad effects, is so welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Mary, anything to respond on that, or you wait for the next time? Do you want to?
I'd like to come in there, please, Mr. Chairman. I fully agree with what Matt has said, and I'm deeply concerned at what has become to be called food miles. This country, through our then Minister for Health, whose name has just slipped my memory, Micheál Martin, showed the world the way by banning smoking in public places. I think we need initiative at that level to again show the way and lead in putting a health warning on packets of imported food which says this packet cost so many and so many litres of oil to bring it to your door. Equally with, say, car advertisements, like in the case of cigarettes, smoking will damage your health. There's no reason why a car advertisement shouldn't have 20% of its space dedicated to say, you are burning a finite resource with this, consider your children and grandchildren, and consider transgenerational inequity.
Now, I do apologise to people at the back. I really find it very difficult to see. Someone thinking laterally has stuck their arm out sideways, and I did see that.
Hello, Derek Welsh, Cork County Council. It's a simple question, very dumbed-down question in relation to the discussion that's gone on, and thank you for finishing with nuclear. It's for Mary. What would it take, Mary, to spread your model of self-empowerment in the African people into the rest of the continent and indeed into the rest of the world?
I work on the answer to that question every day. I really think that it takes first the realization that nobody knows their own culture better than the locals of a country, and really realizing that people, this may or may not be related to what Nate's presentation, but that locals really do have their own cultural norms and a different way of thinking about things, even technology, just things that we might take for granted as far as relating on with one another in Europe or in the States. There's massive differences between Italy or France. You can say there's a big difference between those two countries, but there's an even bigger difference between Europe and a place like Mali, where it literally is the fourth poorest country in the world, and people think very differently. And so I do think that the first step is to really take that into account. And as I said before, the implementing mechanisms of whatever type of project you want to do are going to be the most important. And so but to bring that message to a massive scale is very difficult, because a lot of interest is in Africa and aid right now going on in the world, on magazine covers and things like that. But some of the messages that these high-profile people are saying isn't necessarily what is going to solve the problem, because often they're advised by the same person at either maybe the United Nations or at Columbia Institute of Earth. So they're often getting maybe one perspective on how to intervene, and then that message is really carried out to a large degree because they're able to get on the covers of Vanity Fair or on the news and things like that. And so therefore that message, I think, is what's really getting out there when it comes to aid and to developing countries. And I would just hope that the message focuses more on really watching locals build their own countries and not pouring millions and millions of more dollars into those countries. That's kind of it's a long answer, but that's one of my...
Thank you, Mary. The lateral thinker should be rewarded.
Thank you. My name's Ewan Mearns. I write articles for the Oil Drum Europe. If I may just start by making a short comment and observation on some of the data that we've seen today, and then lead on to asking a question. I spend a lot of time looking at the published data on energy resources and reserves. A number of years ago, someone called Matt Simmons, that many here will know, wrote a book called Twilight in the Desert, drawing attention to the opacity of oil reserves in the Middle East. Now, we've had a few presentations today and some fairly heated debate about both coal reserves and global uranium reserves. I've looked through myself a lot of these reports, and really, at the end of the day, I'm left feeling none the wiser as to how the world is actually positioned with respect to both of these vital resources. So I'd like to hope that perhaps one of the messages that go out from this conference is that some of the international agencies undertake with some urgency an audit of global uranium and coal reserves, so we actually know with some greater certainty going into the latter years of this century if there is going to be energy to substitute or not. My question is actually related to Lord Oxborough's presentation. I don't know if he's still around and able to answer a question. But roughly quoting from the picture he had of household waste that was thrown out, he said, you have an energy crisis and you throw this stuff away. What on earth were you thinking about? And Lord Oxborough, I think, was referring to converting this household waste into liquid fuel, but it could also just be burned to generate electricity in small local combined heat and power stations. So the general question is, what has to happen to make that kind of simple solution happen? It's a no-brainer, but what within our market system and our systems of government has to happen to make these very simple solutions actually start to happen and start to happen soon?
Okay. I'd hazard a guess most people, if not everyone here, would agree with you on the appeal for a more comprehensive review of coal and uranium resources. The question was on biomass. Is Ron still around? Okay. And Ron, while you're waving and a microphone is coming towards you, someone has, with great imagination, smuggled me a letter because I can't see them, and I'm going to ask you another question that is on behalf of them. Do you or any of your... No, forget that bit. Do you have any view about prospects for third-generation geothermal? You're the person to ask this of. heat from unlimited sources beneath the Earth's crust.
Sorry, thank you, Jerry. I thought, can people hear me? Yeah, I thought I was off the hook. In terms of extracting waste from urban garbage, what I was really saying is that we have to look forward to a situation in which each local community, which at present tends to collect its garbage into one place, and that's the first thing you have to do, actually has its own plant at which it extracts the energy from that garbage. Basically, gasification is ultimately the most efficient way of doing this. Having got gas, it will be up to the community to decide what its highest priorities are. It might be sensible to liquefy it and make fuel. It might also, and in many cases perhaps will be, the most sensible thing to do will be to use it to drive power generators. I think there isn't a single comprehensive solution, but I think the important thing is to extract the energy from the garbage and then decide locally how best it's to be used. Big cities will have different solutions from small local communities. As far as third-generation geothermal is concerned, yes. The use of ground source heat pumps is likely to be very important. They are still being improved. At present, the cash economics don't make much sense for retrofit in old buildings, but in most parts of the world, by putting down a hole perhaps 15, 20 meters deep and running cables down that, or in fact long trenches at shallower depth, you can in fact extract heat, which again makes a significant contribution to domestic sustainability. It will be important.
Yeah, I was going to ask Allan and Matt, with biomass expertise, comments from both?
Just following on Lord Rockford, we had a delegation over from the Netherlands, and we were at a loss to know why the Irish glasshouse industry has disappeared and the Dutch has continued to grow and prosper. And the reason is precisely, as you say, that they have developed the geothermal effect, and this has replaced the natural gas. So it's a very real possibility for heating. I think on the whole biomass side, the lack of use of straw, forestry thinnings and so on, we have been reared with a centralised power structure. We have one power industry, one power company, and they have known best. Net metering is not allowed, not catered for in the foreseeable future. The new Minister for Energy has said it's going to be on the way. We wait and see. But so far, there has been zero commitment in this country, I would suggest, to any kind of alternative generation of electricity at all. Wind energy has been pretty actively discouraged, and certainly the use of biomass for any kind of combined heat and power or for any power generation has also been discouraged to a large extent. Whether we're on the cusp of a change or not, time will tell. But so far, there has been zero progress. When you look at even the differential electricity rates being paid, we'll say, to farmers who are generating electricity, wind electricity, or from other sources in Germany at roughly 16 cents a euro, and you compare that, if you get it, to about 6.3 under the latest scheme here in this country, you see the divergences and the mindset that is still there. And I think it's the political mindset that's still operating to deter any kind of local initiatives coming in as localised power generators, for which there is clearly very significant scope.
Again, I find myself endorsing Matt. May I say, apropos of what the questioner asked and Lord Roxburgh's response, municipal garbage, municipal solid waste, there are manifold means of dealing with that. But I believe a much more fundamental way that we need to attack as a society, I'm talking globally, is product and process redesign to reduce the garbage streams into these waste dumps, or whatever you want to call them. It is a waste of resources to treat something as a waste. It's a global resource, we cannot squander it. And to burn it only partly uses the totality of the embedded energy in it. We need to find better ways, and I agree with him on gasification and other processes. Also, we didn't hear too much about how to tighten our belts. And without going back into the nuclear debate, where I don't want to go there, it accounts globally for about 2.5%, as I understand it. And whereas solar furnaces in the Sahara could be set up and they would operate for many, many, many decades with very, very little human additional intervention or replacement. And this is a massive area which hasn't even been fully looked at. There are models for this elsewhere. And I believe that in this conference, perhaps the best we can ever do is to show men of good sense, and I'm thinking of politicians here, that an orgy of planetary plunder is needless, obscene, and flagrantly breaches the boundaries of transgenerational equity. Thank you, Chairman.
I see one there, and then our distinguished chairman wishes to make an interjection.
Hello. Hello. Yes, sorry, I happen to have the microphone, and a question for Nate Higgins, which, first of all, congratulations for this excellent talk. I think you went to the root of the problem, which I see it is not. It's not nuclear, it is not oil, it is not biomass, it is the human mind, as you said very correctly. As long as we have this behavior in which we always want more, nothing will be enough. Not even if we find a real high energetic return source, because we will always outstrip whatever we develop. So the question is whether those data that you presented are contingent in the sense that they are valid for here and now, for a society which has been growing for the past few centuries, and for that section of the world which has been growing, that is the Western nations. Is this tendency that we have to discount the future something which is general for all kinds of societies? So if you try to do those tests in Cuba, as we said, we mentioned that, will they have the same tendency? And how about a stationary society, as it could be an agricultural society? Would still they desire more and more and more? That would be the fundamental point, I think.
There's two issues. Is this turned on? There's two issues. One is, will we ever be happy because we can't have enough? Well, we can change the definition of what we compete for. We can compete for food, who grows the best tomatoes in the neighborhood, and things like that, who lives with the lowest footprint. Ooh, that guy's kind of cool, he uses less energy than me. As far as the discount rate, I believe a lot of what I talked about is genetic, but there's also the nature-nurture debate. Some part is genetic, some part is cultural, and culture absolutely can change how much we value the future. Right now, the market system dictates our cultural values, at least in the developing countries. So we prefer to value time over energy and other things. We maximize our return on time. So yeah, in a new world that's constrained by energy, it could very quickly reach a tipping point where people would lead by example, that other things are making people happy. And, ultimately, it comes down to what women choose. If women choose farmers over real estate developers, everyone's going to want to be farmers. So, ultimately, yes, culture can moderate our discount rates. Not to zero, not to a robot, but it can reduce them.
Yeah, can I ask where solar energy practitioners rank in that?
Is that relates to African villages as well, because often development agencies, it's a big fallacy, they often come in thinking that they automatically know what villagers' desires are, and in fact, instead of a multi-million-dollar tap water for every hut project, you could do a well for $10,000, and often that is what the villager prefers. And there's many stories from Mali where you would see these beautiful drilled wells done by multinationals or big international organization nonprofits. And they'd be so proud of their big drilled well. And often you would see a Malian villager using it to just give the water to his cow, and he'd say, what are you doing? Well, I've never seen water like that before. He really does not recognize clear water as such. You give a bottled water to certain Malian kids, they're going to pour the water right out and keep the bottle because that's what interests them. And I just think that differs. Mali is not the same as Kenya. It's not the same as South Africa. And that's why I really think it's country specific. Know what country you're dealing with and who the people are, which means having to have lived there generally and not just visited on a plane and go to a village for a day and then talk to the politician about what they should do.
Okay, Shell.
Yes, Shell. First of all, I like to say, as there have been some kind of heated discussions about nuclear. I mean, that ASPO is nothing real for nuclear, against nuclear, or anything like that. And in some way, I think that if you believe that this is something for no nuclear and or nuclear, you have completely wrong ideas about it. We are discussing the problem that we are short of fossil fuel in the future, and there must be different solutions. And for some people, it's obviously that nuclear is part of it, and for others not. But I'd like to go back to something that we have achieved already and probably should have been part of this discussion, and that is what happened in Sweden. The government, former government in Sweden, they listened to ASPO, and they appointed a commission that made a study how to make Sweden less dependent on oil. I mean, that's the first, government that had done that. And some of the things that have been discussed here had not been discussed if there had been a presentation how Sweden will make less dependent on oil. I can take my own town, for instance, Uppsala in Sweden, 120,000 people. 90% of all the houses in the town get their heat in a pipe in the ground, go into the house, and the heat in that pipe is getting heated water. 60% of that heat just comes from burning garbage in the town. So 60% of all the heat in Uppsala you get just from burning the garbage for the town. And the rest, the biofraction, I mean, we had to, in two fractions we do it biogas, and the biogas is used for the buses that's running in the town. So I mean, there is a lot of things that you probably have learned from what we are doing in Sweden to get less oil dependent. But again, there is solutions, but I think we should look at that and not fighting. Thank you.
Thank you. And that sort of tees up some of the discussions that are coming this afternoon about more practical measures. And you're quite right, the Swedish plan is an inspiration to everyone. I'm sure many people here talk about it in their presentations. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions, and then what I want to do before we close for lunch is just ask everyone on the panel to think of the single most important point that they've taken away from this morning, or that they want to make on the issues that face us. So let's go to this side of the room. I see a gentleman just down here.
Hi, Paul Butler, Enterprise Ireland. Just an observation, Nate, a quick one here. I think there was an English philosopher, Jeremy Bentham, who got a steal on you, and he said the basis for all human action is self-interest, back in the 1800s. But more of an observation, I suppose, and maybe a question as well at the same time in relation to biofuels. And it's a concern, I suppose. We here in Ireland are building a number of biorefineries at the moment, and there's a number of farming interests that are talking about producing biofuels to feed those. I'd like to ask the panel, how do they think Brazil might fit into the equation of supplying those biofuels, or the raw materials for those biofuels? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's fairly clear-cut. All the biofuels are going up on the coast, as I understand it, the refineries, purely so that they can import. It's also fairly clear, I think, that it's going to be extremely difficult for the European Union to say that we're going to produce ethanol from domestically produced either surplus beet on mainland Europe or wheat elsewhere, I think we will inevitably, any ethanol I think will be imported. As regards to biodiesel, it's interesting. I mean, oilseed rape is, even on a net energy basis using the cake and the seed, is quite positive, probably much more positive than US corn, interestingly. I think if we get the second generation where the straw is also going to be used, all the calculations that I've seen show a very positive net energy basis for oilseed rape. I think we'll be growing it for food rather than fuel, and I think it'll come in probably from Germany if it's biodiesel. And again, I think that's why those particular refineries are also going up on the coast. So on the bioethanol side, it's Brazil. On the biodiesel, I presume Malaysia and Indonesia will get in on the act, but I don't know, depending on what environmental constraints. But I think we produce so little of it here that I think they're right to at least make provision for imports of it. Yeah, okay, I think that's enough.
Okay, the gentleman who was standing, this is the last question, and then we'll start with Nate and go across this way.
Thank you very much. Bruce Robinson from ASPO Australia. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Nate Higgins on his paper, because it's roughly the first important thing to talk about the people side of peak oil. It's one of my interests, and he covered the nature versus nurture thing, that Australia has got all sorts of differences from Europe. We have a very long indigenous culture, a sustainable, very forward-thinking past as society, and they can't have just done things for today or tomorrow. They had to do things on a seasonal basis. They must have had a cultural impact, cultural things. There's a lot of things we can do. I'm interested in ASPO looking at peak oil. If you look at peak oil, then you must look at transport, and we haven't looked at transport much. If you look at transport, you must look at people, and then you get down to the social sciences, which is where Nate was talking about. And in Australia, from German technology, people reduced the car travel, as they've done in other continents, by, say, 12% car kilometres, just by the people side of things. And the question to Nate is, he mentioned lots of academics in different disciplines. What does Nate think that ASPO and the others can do to encourage transdisciplinary study research into the people sides of peak oil? I think that's greatly underestimated. We've talked about nuclear and technology. We haven't looked at much at the people side of it, and that's one of our interests.
There's so many issues involved with peak oil and climate change and everything that it's almost boggles the mind. Everyone in this room is the scout team of trying to see the future and trying to do something about it. I was talking to someone the other night, and I agreed with what he said, that government and traditional academia are going to be too slow to react to these problems because they're very entrenched in historical policies and they move too slow. So we're going to have business people and private citizens take the lead. And what can ASPO do? You know, continue to take risks and speak the truth about the situation as we see it. And you know, gradually we reach a tipping point. I mean, that's all I can suggest as far as that goes.
And that would be your overall thought as well.
Oh, that would be my concluding comment? Yeah. No, I had one more comment.
Okay, fire away with that, and then let's go along the table.
Well, basically what I talked about in my speech was that supply is constrained, as we all know, and conventional economics says that supply and demand meet at some price. I believe that the last 200 years, you know, something now is changing. Economics is going to be replaced by something, because supply ultimately is inelastic, and demand also is ultimately inelastic, and they're not going to meet. So I don't know what that's going to be, but there's a transition coming, and you know, we have a say in what value systems to put in that transition. That's my final comment.
Okay. What concerns me, I mean, I have personally realized, and I'm very convinced about that we as a sort of world human society have reached a peak, the limits of growth, and our mission is now to transmit this information to other people, to those who want to hear, and that we all have to figure out a way on how to go this very steep slope down the hill, and maybe without trying to avoid thunderstorms and cliffs and so on.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Thank you for the invitation to be here. A few things emerged very quickly. One, I was delighted to hear that the cellulose enzymes capable of breaking it down were actually working outside Ottawa Airport. This has really very fundamental consequences. I reckon at this stage an acre of oilseed rape growing in Ireland will have enough fuel for conventional tractors and combines, etc., to grow about 50 acres of arable crops. So the return is very significant if we harness this energy properly. The one question I didn't get answered, which I was hoping would, was that by the climate change, will the flow of the Gulf Stream be affected by the continuing melting of the ice caps? I'd love some elucidation of that before I left this hall. Thank you very much.
I would just say whether you're a large company interested in investing in Africa or a developing country or even an individual looking to invest your money in a charity, that you really consider how the project will be carried out and how it will be implemented and what results you want to see, because that will very much make the difference in how you go about choosing to support a project in those countries.
Philip. What I go away with from this meeting is what I already knew, but it's been reinforced now, that we are facing a very, very serious situation. And there's going to be many, many serious changes having to be made to the way we live, the way we drive, etc., to avoid economic chaos. It's rather easy to be a bit pessimistic. I hope we can get our act together and conserve energy. Energy actually has been too cheap, and maybe with the rise in price it will help. When it hits us in the pocket, it will help conserve. But just to illustrate how cheap it is, I often give this example. If you, in terms of human effort, if you took a world's top professional cyclist and you harnessed him to a generator and you said, I'm going to buy the electricity at the going rate from your efforts, and you let him cycle flat out for 4 hours, you'd actually pay him about 15 euro cents for his efforts. So it's very, very cheap.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with the last speaker's comments about cheap. We were told yesterday that price affects consumption, and I have been at a loss for a number of years why water, retail price of water, should be dearer than milk, and why milk should be dearer than petrol. Perhaps we need a conference about peak milk or peak water. We can have cars that do 100 and better miles per gallon. So I can see no moral justification for looking at the future with Humvees and 4x4s and overblown specification vehicles, and to fuel them we need to bludgeon orangutans and other wildlife sentinel species or otherwise to death to grow palm oil. Secondly, I would ask Matt Dempsey to be so kind as to revisit his comparative figures, and I will be very glad to supply some figures which he may not have seen regarding the net energy from sugar beet compared with oilseed rape. It's practically double. And oilseed rape is not a particularly good choice in terms of land use to energy. In this country, if instead of the EU bludgeoning us into closing down our factories, if they had been sugar factories, if they had been converted to part ethanol, part sugar, that is the most efficient way to do it, and it would have dropped their required sugar production and there would have been no further problems. Also, in this country, if we had converted our sugar factories here to 50% sugar and 50%, to total ethanol production and used the intervening rotational cereals, we could have provided 25% of the petrol requirements, American translation, gasoline requirements of our country, and that is not insignificant. And lastly, as a country with no oil reserves, we're ideally placed and this is my statement here is directed to any politicians in the hall, to lead the world proactively, and this is what has come from me out of this conference, to meet the challenge of peak oil and set several headlines towards the sea change that Professor Pang correctly identified as necessary. The alternative is to condemn future generations to reap the inevitable miseries which would be profoundly unethical of us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.